On Christmas Eve, 1945, a house in Fayetteville, West Virginia, went up in flames. In the ashes, no remains were found, only questions. 5 children vanished that night. No bodies, no traces, just silence, and a mystery that still haunts America today. Fayetteville, West Virginia, a quiet mountain town in the heart of coal country. It's 1945, World War II has just ended. Soldiers are returning home. America is celebrating peace, renewal, and prosperity. For George and Jenny Sodder, life had never been easy, but it was finally stable. George was a proud, hard-working man. Born Giorgio Sodder in Sardinia, Italy, he immigrated to the United States at the age of 13. He built his fortune from the ground up, first as a laborer, then as the owner of a successful trucking business hauling coal and supplies across West Virginia. Jenny was the heart of the home. She raised 10 children, 10. She cooked, cleaned, taught them Italian, and kept their house warm and alive. To neighbors, the Sodders seemed like the perfect immigrant success story. Prosperous, close-knit, respected. But beneath that image, something darker was simmering. George was vocal, too vocal, some said, about his hatred for Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. In a town with a strong Italian-American community, that made him enemies. Some warned him to keep quiet, others were less polite. One man, never identified, came to the house just weeks before the fire. He was there, supposedly, to talk business. But what he said chilled Jenny to her core. "This house, it's gonna burn. Your children are gonna pay for your words." George dismissed the threats. He always had. He was a man of logic. Fire was fire, politics were politics. He never imagined the two could collide. And then, it happened. It was Christmas Eve. The Sodder house was glowing with lights and love. The children were giddy, especially the younger ones. Jenny had let them stay up late, playing with new toys and snacking on fruit and nuts. At 10 p.m., she sent them to bed. George and the 2 oldest sons were already asleep. Jenny stayed up a little longer, folding laundry. At 12:30 a.m., the phone rang. A woman's voice. Wrong number. Strange laughter in the background. Jenny noticed the caller seemed confused or mocking. She hung up. But as she turned to go back to bed, something caught her eye. The lights were still on. The curtains open. The door unlocked. Her children, who had promised to sleep, were nowhere to be seen. She turned off the lights, closed the curtains, and went to bed. At 1 a.m., Jenny was jolted awake by the smell of smoke. She rushed out of bed and into the hallway. Flames were racing up the staircase. The living room was already ablaze. She screamed for her husband, for her children. In the panic, 4 children made it out. George, Jenny, and their surviving kids escaped into the freezing night, barefoot, in pajamas. But 5 were still inside, trapped. George smashed a window to get back in. The heat drove him back. He tried to reach the attic, where the missing children had slept, but the staircase had collapsed. He ran outside to fetch the ladder. It was gone. Gone. Vanished. Next, he ran to his trucks. He kept them parked beside the house, always ready to use in emergencies. He turned the key. Nothing. He tried the other one, also dead. 2 fully functional vehicles, suddenly useless. The Sodders stood in the cold, helpless, and watched their home burn to the ground, with 5 of their children still inside. Or so they thought. When the flames finally died down, all that was left of the Sodder home was ash and rubble. But what they didn't find was even more chilling than what they did. No bones, no bodies, no trace of the 5 children who were believed to be upstairs when the fire broke out. Local authorities declared the fire an accident. Faulty wiring, they said, an unfortunate tragedy. The case was closed in a matter of days. But Jenny Sodder wasn't convinced. Neither was George. Jenny went to a local crematorium and asked a question that would become central to the mystery. Wouldn't bones remain after a fire? The answer was yes. Even in house fires that burned hotter and longer than the one that destroyed the Sodder home, some form of remains, bone fragments, teeth, something, is always found. Here, there was nothing. Jenny didn't stop there. She burned small animal bones in her stove. She researched cremation temperatures. She grilled fire experts. They all told her the same thing. A house fire, especially one that burned for only 45 minutes, would not have completely cremated 5 human bodies. And then there was the matter of the fire itself. The Christmas lights, Jenny remembered, had stayed on during the early part of the fire. That wouldn't happen if the wiring had failed. The coroner's jury included a man who had threatened George months earlier, a man who had warned him, "Your house is going to burn." And now he was one of the people deciding the cause of the blaze. Even stranger, the fire chief, F.J. Morris, later claimed to have found a heart in the ashes. He put it in a box and buried it in a nearby field. When George demanded it be exhumed, it was sent for analysis. It wasn't a heart at all. It was a cow's liver, untouched by flame. Why lie? Why plant fake evidence? Why rush to declare the children dead without a single body? George and Jenny were convinced of one thing: their children hadn't died in that fire. They had been taken. In the weeks following the fire, a cloud of unease settled over Fayetteville. The town had its official story, but the Sodders were not buying it. And soon, whispers began to spread. A woman came forward. She claimed she had seen the missing Sodder children peering out of a car window while the fire was still burning. The car had passed through town before sunrise, heading west. Another witness, a motel owner in Charleston, roughly 50 miles away, said she had seen the children with 4 adults, 2 men and 2 women of apparent Italian descent. The children, she said, looked confused. None of them spoke. The adults were sharp, tense. They wouldn't let the children out of their sight. More sightings followed, from Kentucky, from Florida, even as far away as New York. Always the same: 5 children who looked like the Sodders, accompanied by unfamiliar adults. The Sodders followed every lead, every letter, every phone call, every rumor. They hired private investigators. Some were helpful, others took their money and vanished. In one case, a private eye tracked down a man in Florida who claimed to know someone involved in the disappearance. When George pressed him for details, the man clammed up. Days later, he disappeared. Then came the photograph. In 1967, over 20 years after the fire, Jenny received an envelope in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was a single photograph of a man in his 20s, standing against a plain background. On the back, a handwritten message: Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, little boys, A90132 or 35. The man in the photo looked eerily like Louis would have, grown up, the same eyes, the same hairline. The Sodders sent the photo to the FBI. They asked for facial analysis, a trace, anything. The FBI refused to get involved. It was, they said, a local matter. George and Jenny were devastated, but they never stopped. They enlarged the photograph and added it to their roadside billboard, along with a $5,000 reward. Eventually, they raised it to $10,000. The message was clear: we haven't forgotten, we never will. And the sightings didn't stop. But every time the Sodders got close, every time a story emerged that seemed credible, the trail would go cold. As if someone didn't want the truth to come out. As if someone was watching. By the early 1950s, the Sodder family home was long gone. In its place, George and Jenny planted a flower garden, their own quiet memorial to the 5 children who, in their hearts, had not perished in that fire. But they wanted more than remembrance. They wanted answers. So they built something bigger. Just off U.S. Route 16, not far from the site of the fire, the Sodders erected a massive billboard. Weathered wood, black and white photos, bold text that asked the question the authorities wouldn't touch. What was their fate? Kidnapped? Murdered? 5 faces stared out at every passing car: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny Jr., and Betty. Beneath them, a cash reward, and a timeline of strange events, strange sightings, and unanswered questions. This wasn't a billboard, it was a protest, a plea, a challenge to anyone who knew something and to a system that refused to dig deeper. For the next 30 years, the billboard became a landmark. People traveled just to see it. Some stopped to talk, others whispered and drove on. A few came forward with more leads, but nothing stuck. George spent the rest of his life chasing shadows. He would drive across the country in his truck, sometimes alone, sometimes with a private investigator, chasing rumors, tips, and stories. If someone said they saw a boy who looked like Louis in Texas, George went to Texas. Jenny, once vibrant and sociable, turned inward. She wore black every day, for the rest of her life. She refused to celebrate holidays, refused to let go. The billboard became more than a mystery. It became a symbol of obsession, of love that refused to die, of questions that refused to be buried. George died in 1969, Jenny in 1989. But the billboard remained, maintained by their surviving children, a permanent reminder, a cry for justice, and a warning that not all stories have endings. Over the decades, speculation around what happened on that night in 1945 has spiraled into a web of theories, some grounded, others far more sinister. One of the most persistent beliefs is that the Sodder children were kidnapped, taken by someone with motive, resources, and help. But why? Some pointed to George's political opinions. His vocal hatred for Mussolini had earned him enemies. Perhaps someone wanted to punish him, silence him, or simply make an example out of him. Could the kidnapping have been orchestrated by Mussolini loyalists living in America? Far-fetched, perhaps, but not impossible in the shadow of a recent war. Others believed it was a targeted abduction. Maybe the children were taken to be raised by another family, or trafficked into organized crime networks. Fayetteville sat near major transportation routes. It wouldn't have been difficult to vanish across state lines overnight. Then there's the cover-up theory. What if the fire wasn't started by accident or by strangers, but by someone the family knew? Someone local. The missing ladder, the dead trucks, the suspicious delay from the fire department, the so-called heart in the ashes. There are too many inconsistencies. And the threats? The man who warned George, the man on the coroner's jury, the refusal of the authorities to reopen the case, even after new leads surfaced. All of it suggests something deeper, maybe a conspiracy, or maybe a system simply too embarrassed to admit it got it wrong. Some skeptics argue the children really did die in the fire, and grief warped the Sodders' perception. They suggest the chaos, the speed of the blaze, and the trauma could have created false hope. But even that theory fails to explain the absence of remains. No matter which version you believe, one thing is certain: something about the Sodder case doesn't add up. Too many loose ends, too many unanswered questions, too many coincidences to dismiss. It's not just a mystery, it's a wound. Still open, still raw. And after nearly 80 years, it continues to bleed questions no one has been able to answer. Decades have passed since that snowy night in Fayetteville, but the mystery of the Sodder children remains as gripping and as tragic as ever. After George's death in 1969 and Jenny's in 1989, the remaining Sodder children took up the mantle. They maintained the billboard. They kept the story alive. They kept asking the question, what happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty? But over time, the trail went cold. Leads dried up. Witnesses passed away. The world moved on. Eventually, the iconic billboard was taken down in the late 1980s. It had stood for over 3 decades, weathered by time, but unwavering in its purpose. To some, it was a local curiosity. To others, a symbol of enduring grief and unrelenting love. The Sodder case has become a cautionary tale, a piece of American folklore. It has inspired books, documentaries, podcasts. Theories continue to thrive in online forums. Amateur sleuths still dig, still question, still hope for one more clue that might explain the unexplainable. But for the Sodder family, it was never about headlines. It was about family, about love that wouldn't quit, about refusing to accept silence in place of truth. Today, all that remains are faded photographs, old newspaper clippings, and a question that has never been answered. Were the Sodder children victims of a tragic fire or something far more sinister? Whatever the truth is, it was lost in the smoke of that Christmas Eve. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there still knows what really happened. Because 5 children don't just vanish. Not without a trace. Not without a reason. If you're intrigued by unsolved mysteries and chilling cases, check out my playlist, True Crime Murders and Disappearances, for more unsolved cases.